Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Country Education Partnership Free Professional Development Winter Series. My name is Brendan Ryan. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Country Education Partnership acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Victoria and Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Today is the third session in the Winter Professional Development Series, and our focus today is AI in education. Before we move into today's program, as usual, I want to introduce our Chief Executive Officer, Mark Mackay, who will provide an update regarding CEP happenings. Mark.
Thank you, Brendan. Just two areas I want to focus on today. One is our Small Schools Forum in combination with the Victorian Academy for Teaching and Leadership will be occurring tomorrow. We have over 150 registrations, and that's a hybrid model being delivered into the 7 regional academy sites, so that's really exciting. And it's all hands on deck for CEP for that tomorrow. And the other piece of news, we've been supporting a P-12 alliance of rural government schools across Victoria. There's 45 schools in that group, and that group have secured a session at the statewide principals conference to deliver, and also set up quarterly meetings with one of the deputy secretaries of education. So they're progressing really well as a representative group for P12s and K12s across Victoria, and certainly exciting times, and we're really pumped to be supporting such a group. So there's a couple of things that have been happening for us. Brendan, back to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Today's session is the third in a series of 4 winter series, and will take exactly 1 hour. We'll conclude by 5 o'clock. The session is being recorded, and you'll have the opportunity to review the session at a later date if you wish. And I make the point that all previous sessions are also available through the website. Before you finish the session, we would encourage everybody to complete the survey. Last week I noticed that most people tuned off before completing the survey. I would really encourage people to make sure that you do complete that before you finish the day. And if you have a question during the session, please include it in the chat box, and we'll endeavour to either answer the question today or get back to you at a later date. So please don't hesitate to put questions into the chat box. It's now my pleasure to introduce Morris Billy, a program manager who will introduce our guests today and facilitate today's session. Over to you, Morris.
Thanks, Brendan, and welcome everybody to this afternoon's session. I hope wherever you are, everybody is staying nice and warm on this beautiful winter's day. Really looking forward to today's session. A little later on, we're going to be hearing from Joanne Tate, who's going to be giving us some information about Ecolinc, which I'm really looking forward to. But first up today, we have Peter Vamplew from Federation Uni, the Institute of Innovation, Science and Sustainability. And it's often been described as the rise of the machines, artificial intelligence. But I'm sure we're here today to say there's nothing to be scared about. It's just a good idea to be educated in this space, and I think we have one of the finest people who can share that with us today and give us a run through about artificial intelligence, and particularly with its role in education in this country going forward. So Peter, I'd like to welcome you, and as I do, I just wondered if you wanted to comment on a story I read about you from about a decade ago about a particular issue with an institute in the US and some issues you had with you being on their mailing list and how you responded to that. Now, is that story true? I only came across that today, and if it's not, we can move on.
Absolutely true, yes.
Is it? That was fascinating. I loved reading that, and I encourage people to read a bit more about it if you don't want to expand on it today.
Yeah, very briefly for everyone. About a decade ago, I got fed up with all the spam emails we get from fake journals and conferences asking us to submit papers. I sent them a joke paper that some researchers in America had written a few years earlier, and the journal actually accepted it for publication, despite the fact that the title and the entire content of the paper consist of the words, "Get me off your fucking mailing list," repeated about 3,000 times. And it kind of went global back in 2014.
It did. It was fantastic. It was a wonderful story to read about, and I encourage people to read it, to just Google Peter and check out the Guardian story from, I think it was 2014. But on that note, and a lighthearted way to start, let's find out a bit more about artificial intelligence. Peter, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Morris, and thanks also to Matt for inviting me along today, and to everyone who's joining us or watching this on video later on. Let me just stop sharing again. Okay, I think that should be working.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I've got kind of a talk in two parts today. I've reused an old talk for the first half just to give some general background on what artificial intelligence is, because I think that context of having at least some understanding of what it is and how it works becomes important in knowing how to deal with it from an education perspective. So I'll try and rip through that part reasonably quickly, and then get to the second half where we can talk a bit more about education specific issues that come up because of these AI systems. I'm happy for people to jump in at any point with questions, but I can't see Teams while I'm running the PowerPoint slides. So if anyone does put their hand up, can one of the admins just let me know, interrupt me, and we can go to questions at that point. The bit of background just on myself, I'm a professor of IT at Federation University, and before that at University of Ballarat, when that was our name. I've been involved in AI research for more than 30 years now, so it's been a very exciting time for me this last decade or so. Things we talked about for years are actually coming to fruition. But of course, as well as being a researcher, I'm also a teacher, and that side of it has been very worrying because these tech systems have come up and advanced so quickly that we really haven't had time to think about and adapt our teaching and assessment approaches to cope with the existence of these systems. And I think at the universities, we've been in probably the same boat that schools have been for the last couple of years of just making things up on the fly, trying to cope with these problems as they arise. So yeah, today really is going to cover kind of both aspects of my interests, both from the research and the teaching side of things. Bit of a warning to start with, this talk is out of date. I've updated slides from about a year ago, but to be honest, I could have updated this 2 weeks ago, it would still be out of date. The speed of progress in this field has just been astonishingly. Just in the last couple of weeks, there are new systems that have come out that do generation of full video, and the quality of those, the step up from what they were doing 2 months ago is quite extraordinary. So that's going to be one of my messages towards the end of today, is that it's no good thinking about how do we deal with what's out there now. We need to be looking 1, 2, 3 years ahead, anticipating how these systems are going to evolve and planning for that before it happens. Otherwise, we're just going to be playing, trying to chase and catch up for the next few years. Okay, so roughly what I want to talk about today, background really, what is AI? How do we develop AI? Because that has some implications for what sort of capabilities it has. I want to flag a few of the recent breakthroughs and applications, the things that have really come to the public's attention over the last few years. Talk a bit about some general downsides, not education specific, but just more broadly, what is AI going to do to us as a society? A little bit of touch on how we might minimize some of those downsides. And that's basically background, so I'll try and get through that reasonably quickly. And then move on to talking about how is this impacting on education in particular. And one of my hopes here is that, you know, I don't have the answers. I can give you some guidelines based on my experience, but I'm really hoping just to pick people's brains today, and that I might learn something that I can put back into my practice as well. Okay, and just a couple of pictures, which I'll point out, these were AI generated, and a year ago, this wowed the audience. Nobody had seen anything like this before, and the quality of these pictures was incredible. Of course, now most people have probably at least seen these systems, if not even actually played around with them. And the quality of the images that you get from modern generative AI system are much better than the ones that I have in my slides today. Okay, so what is AI? It's basically impossible to really define it. There was an old joke in AI research that for many years, you know, as soon as we solved a problem, it wasn't AI anymore, because people said, well, that's not really smart, it's not really intelligent. And so, you know, we could talk for an hour about trying to define this, but ultimately what it boils down to is computer systems that can carry out tasks that we would say were intelligent if a person was performing them. And increasingly what that's meant in recent years is that they can work with the same sort of information that people do. So they can read text, they can look at images, they can listen to speech or audio or music or whatever, and they can make the same sort of decisions that humans can. That's broadly what we mean by artificial intelligence. Now, it actually is not a new thing. It's been around as a concept since about the 1950s, pretty much from the moment that we first had digital computers. People obviously started out using them mostly just as number crunchers, but pretty quickly they realized, well, if we can work with numbers, what other types of data can we work with as well? And so from, you know, the very early days of computer science research, this concept of artificial intelligence arose. And there were some early breakthroughs. Some of the early systems worked quite well on things like playing games like chess, some medical diagnosis type systems. You would input a list of symptoms and it would tell you, you know, the possible diseases the patient might have. There were some quite successful mathematical theorem solving programs. These were largely based around what we call symbolic AI. It's basically about representing knowledge symbolically and then manipulating that. And so what a lot of these systems really boiled down to were essentially a set of if-then statements. If these particular conditions apply, then make this decision or carry out this action. And so that worked well for some domains, but other types of problems turned out to be difficult to solve with this. If you think about the task of just giving an image to a computer and saying, what object is this? Very, very difficult to write symbolic rules that will actually be able to carry out that sort of operation. It turns out, you know, a lot of the things that we thought would require intelligence because we find them hard, like proving mathematical theorems, turned out to be relatively easy for a computer intelligence. The things we think of as being easy because we just do them without actually any conscious thought, like recognizing objects, navigating through a room without bumping into things, listening to speech and interpreting it and having a conversation with someone. Those turned out to be the things that these symbolic techniques really struggled with. And so there was a big boom in AI interest, I think in the 50s and again in the 70s, but it didn't really deliver on the hype. You know, there was a lot of promise. I think some of the early AI researchers said, look, by 1980, we'll have a machine that can do anything a human can. And obviously, by 1980, we were nowhere near achieving those targets. We're in the middle of another hype cycle for AI at the moment. It's being pushed as the solution to everything, and it's not. You know, we're not at the point where we have true, what we call artificial general intelligence yet, the sort of system that can do anything that a human could do. The systems we're dealing with are still fairly specialized and narrow in scope, but they are actually getting to the point where they're useful outside of just very constrained situations in research labs we've started to see AI systems actually being rolled out and applied to real problems, in the real world. You think about things like Alexa and Siri and so on, these virtual assistants that we all have on our phones. That is essentially an application of AI technology. So how did we get from those early symbolic systems to the sort of systems we have now? Well, basically there was a shift in methodology, and we moved across to using what we call machine learning techniques. The basic idea here is that rather than trying to find a human expert in solving a problem, ask them how they solve the problem, and then encode that as a bunch of these if statements, instead we just gather large, increasingly large and huge amounts of data. We put that into one of these machine learning systems, and it essentially figures out for itself what are the patterns in that data that correspond to solutions to the problem that I'm trying to solve. So as an example, if you want a system that can translate from one language to another, conventional approaches would have been, let's build a dictionary that maps, this word in English corresponds to this word in French, and these English grammatical structures correspond to these French grammatical structures. And people have been trying to do that for decades with limited success. If you looked at translation systems 20 years ago, they were not very good at all. The machine learning approach instead just says, look, let's find all the documents we can online. And of course, almost everything is online these days. And everywhere we've got a document in English and a corresponding document in French, we'll feed it into this system, and it will figure out for itself which words correspond to which other words, how you map grammatical structures in one language into grammatical structures in another language. And this is the technique that underpins systems like Google Translate. And they're not perfect, but they are a light year ahead of the symbolic systems that we had 10, 20 years ago. And they are now at the point where they are actually usable. I was sent an email with a form the other day from a French-speaking university. I can't read that email, but I pumped it through Google Translate, and it does good enough a job of translating it that I can actually take action and send back the reply that's appropriate to the person who sent me that email. And so this is really what's one of the big factors that's driven the boom in AI in recent years. There's really three things. One is more computing power. The second is some improvements in terms of these machine learning algorithms. But the biggest difference has turned out that just having more data can lead to quantum improvements in the performance of these systems. And so, of course, since about 1993 or so, everything started going online. Every piece of information in the world is now somewhere on the World Wide Web. The big tech companies can basically just trawl all of that data off the web, and they've been using it to train these systems. And it turns out if you throw enough data at one of these machine learning systems, you start getting quite remarkable results. So if you look at a few of the success stories of recent years, one of the first ones that really caught public's attention was when Google DeepMind basically solved the game of Go. They released a system called AlphaGo, which had essentially taught itself to play the game of Go. It just played billions and billions of games against itself, and it learned which moves led to winning and which moves led to losing. They played this against the world champion and beat him quite handily. I think it was about 4-1 in championship against him. There's a really nice documentary online about this, by the way. I think you can find it on YouTube for free these days. That goes into a bit of the behind the scenes of how they actually built this system. And this really grabbed the attention of AI researchers because, to be honest, we thought this was 10, 15 years in the future. And suddenly, here's this problem being solved. Autonomous driving, another area that's got a lot of attention in recent years. This is still not a solved problem. A few years ago, the sort of rate of progress was suggesting, look, we might have fully autonomous driving vehicles by 2025. I think we're still, at least maybe another 5 or so years off. This has turned out to be a harder problem than they thought it was. Getting data in the real world is very different from getting data in a game. You can play billions of games of Go. All you need is a lot of computing power. You can't easily get billions of hours of experience in driving an actual car in the real world, because of course it's dangerous to do that until you've actually trained the system to work in the first place. So we're still a bit off on this one. We have seen some big breakthroughs in protein folding. About 3 years ago, DeepMind released AlphaFold, and they've just announced an update to it recently. And this is apparently going to be transformative for biological and medical research. We're going to see some really interesting breakthroughs coming out of this over the next few years. Of course, the ones that have really caught the public's eye over the last couple of years, and the ones that are probably most relevant from an educational perspective, is this field known as generative AI, which can take prompts, usually written in text, and generate new pieces of information based on that. And that can be text-based. So this is an example from The Guardian. I think it was maybe 1 or 2 years ago this one was published, when ChatGPT was first released as the first one of these generative AI systems that was really powerful and accessible to the public. And so the journalist basically prompted ChatGPT, write me an article from the perspective of one of these large language models. And you can see, it comes up with a quite convincing piece of text that looks like something that a human might have written. And similarly, as we saw with my diagrams before, you can do the same sort of thing with images now. So you can say, look, I want an image, 2 researchers in white lab coats, etc., and it will come back with a range of images for you to choose from. And we're now seeing we can generate music, we can generate speech, we can generate videos. That's kind of the latest area that's starting to fall under the control of these generative AI systems these days. So let me just, before I go on, just going back, let me think about how these systems actually work, because this is important when it comes to the educational perspective. It looks like this system understands the topic, but in fact, what's happening behind the scenes is this generative AI system is essentially just predicting what is the most likely word to come next based on the words that I've seen so far. So there will have been a prompt from the journalists telling it what it was writing about. And on the basis of that, it's decided that the most appropriate word to come next is I, followed by am, followed by not. There's no deep understanding behind this process, but you can see it turns out, this is quite convincing. It produces text that looks correct. It looks grammatical, it's spelt correctly, it's on the topic that we would expect it to be on. It's surprising that just predicting the most likely next word turns out to be so effective. I don't think anyone really expected this to work as well as it has. Okay, what problems might we have with AI? One is that it can be biased. Whatever data you put into the system, that's what the system learns to reproduce. So for example, Amazon a few years back tried to use an AI system. They trained it on their recruitment records. So they got the CVs of all the applicants that they'd interviewed in recent years, ran it through the system, also told it which people it had hired, and told it, learn to detect the patterns that correspond to the hires that we would have made. And what they found when they ran it was it only chose men. If there was anything, if the CV indicated this applicant was female, they didn't get hired. So they tried stripping all of the fields that indicated someone's gender out of the CV, removed names and so on that might indicate this, ran it again, and it still had the same problem. It was still biased towards men. There's 2 things going on here. One is that this was just reflecting their traditional biases. 95% of their hires for software engineering position had been men. And so the system had just learned, okay, well, that's what you want. That's what I'm going to choose for you. The other thing was it had learned to detect what we call proxies. So while there was nothing in the CV that directly told you whether someone was a man or a woman, if there was discussion about, say, their hobbies, for example, and if it said, I played for my college baseball team, well, that's a male applicant. If it says I've played for the college softball team, that's a female. And the system used those proxies to get around the fact that it wasn't being explicitly told which gender the candidates were, and used that to perpetuate the bias that was in the training data. And obviously when this happened, Amazon had to take the system down and not actually use it in practice, because they would have opened themselves to all sorts of legal repercussions. So that's just one example of bias, but you can imagine the same sort of things. If you trained a system to mark student essays, if there was any bias in previous essays that you were training it on that were marked by human teachers, those biases will be reflected in the AI. Deepfakes is another one. So the ability to take a video, I think the one on the left-hand side in this case is the original video, and the person's manipulated that so that they now look like Tom Cruise on the right-hand side. So of course, this can be used for scams. It can be used for harassment. We've seen this case last week about deepfake nudes being generated of secondary school students here in Victoria. So this is, again, a real problem, a potential misuse of this AI technology that, really wouldn't have been possible without an AI system. We've got the risk of the AI itself actually carrying out these scams. If you can develop a chatbot that can contact people, talk to them, convince them to invest in some dodgy scheme that you're trying to promote, it's essentially the same problem we've seen with things like phishing in recent years, but this can be done more or less for free these days. You can generate huge amounts of this information, and these systems are likely to learn to be very effective at manipulating our emotions and manipulating our decisions. So this is going to become a problem in the future.
Peter, just on that, I was reading today, in fact, that one of the world's largest corporations, McDonald's, have abandoned their trial of using AI in one of their drive-throughs because of a whole range of issues as well. So clearly, it's not perfect and it has challenges. And after about 18 months, they've had to abandon the trial because it was causing all sorts of problems in their drive-through system.
Yeah, I think there's been this big rush towards this technology, and it's not really robust enough just yet. But of course, as it gets better, it becomes better at doing the things we want it to do, but it also becomes potentially better at doing the things that bad actors like scammers want it to do as well. So as the technology improves, the problems aren't going to go away; they're just going to change their nature a bit. So how do we avoid these problems? I mean, things like data bias, we can try and clean the data beforehand. So rather than just pumping any old data through the system, you need to look at it very carefully to start with. If there are biases in the data, you need to try and edit the data in some way to remove those. And of course, this is a problem when you look at the way these large language models and these image models are trained. They're just grabbing huge amounts of data. Anything they can get off of the net, they're using. And anyone who's spent any time in the comments section on any internet site knows that there is a lot of very dodgy, very dangerous information out there that we wouldn't want AI systems to reproduce. But by default, if you put that data into the system, you're going to get that data back. There was a case a few years ago, Microsoft released a chatbot called Tate on Twitter, and within about 3 hours, Tate was just spewing racist, misogynistic, horrible content back because that's what people on Twitter had started feeding it. So they had to take it down because obviously they didn't want to be associated with that sort of thing. So there is a real risk here. You've got to be sure that the data you put into the system corresponds to the sort of behavior you want to get out of it. And checking that is not easy, particularly when you're dealing with these massive, massive data sets. The second thing companies have tried doing is putting what they call guardrails or constraints on these systems. So that image I had earlier on my intro slide of a robot kind of forcing humans to work for it, that was the original prompt that I put into DALL-E, the AI system I was using. And when I first tried this, I got this message back, basically saying, you know, this doesn't follow our content policy and we're going to suspend your account if you keep trying to do this. And after a bit of digging around, I discovered it was actually the word slave that it was objecting to. They essentially had a taboo list. You know, if you mention certain words like violent terms and blood and pornography and so on, it would actually block you from trying to produce that sort of content. Companies have also kind of done this the other way around as well. One of the criticisms that was found, particularly with the image-based systems, was that what you often got back were stereotypes. You know, if you asked for a wealthy, successful business person, you get a white guy with grey hair in a suit. And so what some of these systems started trying to do was, behind the scenes, you would give it a prompt and they would add extra terms to that prompt to try and force diversity into the responses, so that you would get some images that came back with women, you get some people with people from different ethnicities, so on. And I remember a month or so ago, there was a bit of an outcry when people were finding out if you tried to get an image of a World War II Nazi soldier, they were still applying these diversity terms, and so you would get back images of, you know, Asian women wearing Nazi uniforms, which clearly was not what people were trying to produce, and might in itself be seen as being offensive. So, you know, this is not easy. It's a very difficult area to try to address. The other aspect of it is to take a non-technical approach to this and say, look, we need laws, we need policies on how these systems can be built, on how they can be applied, where they should be used, you know, responsibly within our society. So here in Australia, we're lagging a little bit behind some other countries. We have got CSIRO kind of pushing this responsible AI as one of their main themes. There's been a little bit of work. I think we signed up to this treaty recently at Bletchley Park in the UK, so that we agree with other countries that there is a need to monitor and restrict AI systems. What that will actually mean in terms of practical policy, we don't really know yet. And of course, that's at a kind of whole of society level. At an organizational level, we need to start thinking about, you know, what are our policies? So if we're in an educational institution, is it okay for our students to use these generative AI systems? If so, what sort of restrictions should there be on that? I'll come back and talk about that a bit more in a moment. Okay, so that kind of leads me into now the second half of today, talking about implications from an educational perspective. And I think what we're going to find is that basically almost every aspect of education we're going to have to rethink. We're going to think about what we're teaching, what are the appropriate contents and skills that we want to be teaching to our students. How are we going to teach them? And the one that's probably most pressing in the short run, how are we going to assess students' learning? Because I don't know about you, but almost as soon as these tools came out, we started seeing students at university using them, and it's almost immediately had an impact on how we can assess things. First thing I would say is that the essay is dead. I think for years this was kind of the easy go-to. If you can write an essay on a particular topic, you must have some understanding of that topic. And unfortunately, these days, generative AI systems can write pretty good essays. They're not perfect, but my experience is they're probably as good as the average student, if not slightly better. Certainly in terms of grammar and language usage and so on, and structuring things correctly, I think these generative AI systems are actually better than the average university student. Topic-wise, they're not perfect, but gee, they're pretty good. You've got to look pretty closely at one of these essays before you start to think, I don't think it actually understands this topic. It's certainly not something where if you can just quickly look through, you know, marking an essay in a few minutes, just kind of skimming through it, and I give you an AI essay, I think it's going to pass. And it's interesting because, as we were saying before, that we know they don't understand these topics. They've got no deep symbolic representation of knowledge. They don't logically reason through things, and occasionally you can trip them up and find that's the case because they'll start saying things that are kind of inconsistent with something they said earlier. But it turns out this whole process of just guessing the next word produces very plausible text. As I say, it's often actually better written and structured than our student work would be. It's interesting to think about it now. I mean, maybe this is an indication that the essay was never really a good proxy for understanding in the first place. And so I think, having essay-based assessment tasks, having exams with short written answers, these systems do a really good job on those sort of questions. When ChatGPT first came out, one of the first things I did was just to take one of my exams from the previous year and run each question through this system. And it would have got 70%, I reckon, if I'd marked it. It clearly would have passed the subject and probably would have been in the top half of my cohort of students. So this has become a real problem for us. How do I go about assessing something when I can't rely on just asking the student to write about it? Just an example to illustrate this. So here's a prompt that I've put into ChatGPT the other day. So just asking it to write the opening paragraph of an essay. I've told it what I want it to talk about. I've told it that it's an essay. I've asked for an overview of the structure that the whole essay will follow, because of course, once it's given me a structure, I can then feed it back in and ask it to write each of the sections that correspond to that. And this is what I got back. And if you have a quick skim through that, I mean, it's done what I asked it to do. This looks like the introduction to an essay. It's talking about pretty much the right topic. Talk about educators leveraging them to streamline assessment processes, personalized learning, etc., etc. And then down here at the end, it's telling me the essay's about this. Here's the structure. I'm going to begin by talking about the key role it plays in assessment. Then I'm going to talk about ethical considerations, etc. And then finally, the essay will contemplate blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's basically what I would have expected a student to write. There's maybe a few giveaways here. Some of the language usage, like there are some 50-cent words like elucidating that probably most students wouldn't use. But, grammatically, content-wise, that's pretty much right. Now, maybe this isn't exactly what I was looking for, because it's talking a little bit more about how we might use AI for assessment rather than the impact of students using it. So what I went back, I modified my prompt and asked it something slightly different. So I just rewrite this to focus more on the effects which student use of generative AI would have. And it did exactly that. It rewrote this whole thing, and now the focus is much more on the students' side of things. Again, maybe the language is a little over the top, but I can address that. I can say, rewrite this using the vocabulary and style of a high school student. And you can see it basically has done that. I think it's gone a bit too far. This has got very informal. So maybe I should have asked it for a good quality high school student instead. But you can see this is only a few minutes work for me. And I can generate huge amounts of text that basically are going to meet the assessment requirements. If I've been told to write an essay on this topic, within 10, 20 minutes, I can have an essay on that topic, even if I know practically nothing about the topic myself. So yeah, essay writing, I think, is going to be basically useless as an assessment criteria. Can we detect it? Yes-ish, a little bit. If someone uses it badly, you can detect that. There's been some people looking at Google Scholar, so this is searching through published research articles, and someone just said, look, what happens if you look for some of the key phrases that ChatGPT tends to reproduce. So it often starts off its response with, as an AI language model. And what turns out, if you search Google Scholar for that, you find lots of articles where that appears. So clearly the authors in this case have just used ChatGPT, generated something that looks like a paper, submitted it to a journal or a conference, and got it published. And there are hundreds of these out there. So this is a real problem. So again, if your students do the same sort of thing, if they leave some of these obvious flaws in there, yeah, you can detect that. The other thing generative AI has a tendency to do is that it sometimes makes things up. And the term hallucination has tended to be adopted for this. So if you ask it to write an essay with references in it, it will generate something that looks like a reference. But if you go back and check it, it might not actually correspond to anything in practice. I encountered this with one of my own students 2 days ago. It was about a topic which I knew about, and I didn't recognize any of the references they were citing, so I went up, searched a few of them online, and there is no paper of that name, and yet the student has handed in a report that spends a whole paragraph telling me what that paper is about. So clearly in that case, I know they've used one of these generative AI systems, and when I get time, I'm going to fill in the paperwork to actually report that for academic misconduct. The other possibility is to use, there are some tools now that are claiming we can detect the use of these generative AI systems. I don't think they can, and several studies have been reported saying that they can't. They're not very good at this. Take that example from yesterday. I know those paragraphs were obviously generated using one of these language models because the content clearly is fictitious, and I can't imagine a student would have gone to the effort to actually make up a fake reference when it's probably easier for them to just find a real one. Those paragraphs were not flagged. We run everything through Turnitin. Turnitin has this AI detection tool. That particular student's essay, I think, came back as, there's 4% evidence of this being AI generated, which was about the lowest score I saw for any students. Another student got an 85% score. And to be honest, I think there was more chance they wrote that themselves than there was that the first student wrote their bit themselves. So I think the sort of accuracy rates that these tools are reporting, I don't think are reproducible. They certainly don't match my experience. There have been studies showing that these tools tend to have, again, there's a bit of a bias in them. Students that don't have English as a first language, their writing style, even when they write themselves, tends to look more like an AI system than the students who have English as a first language. And so if you're dealing with international students or students that aren't coming from an English-speaking background, there's a greater chance that this tool is going to flag them incorrectly as having used an AI tool when they haven't. And of course, the evidence you get from this is not conclusive. All you get is this tool says there's a 70% chance this was created by an AI. It can't point to particular features and highlight, this is the bit I think is wrong. Whereas, plagiarism detection tools will actually highlight, here's this whole paragraph of text that directly matches this essay that was written 3 years ago. It's copied. That's pretty strong evidence. I don't think you could legitimately take any sort of punitive action against a student on the basis of one of these detection reports. At best, I think what you can do is use it as an initial check. And if you think, this is a bit dodgy, I think this student's used one of these tools, then you might have some sort of follow-up, like doing an interview with them where you can ask them in person to establish whether they do actually have any understanding of the topic or not. Can we avoid this problem by writing assessment tasks that these systems can't solve? A year or two ago, I think maybe you could. One of the things I experimented with was having questions that involved an image. So here's a picture of something, and answer this question with reference to that picture. Now, the original version of ChatGPT only handled text input. So if I gave it a question like that, it couldn't deal with it. It's not the case anymore. So just a year or two later, a student can now just kind of point their phone at the exam paper and it will read the question, it will look at the image, and it will give an answer that's, yeah, pretty good. So, you know, my technique from 1 year ago is now redundant. And this is, as I was saying before, as an expert from the US that I got to go to a talk by last year, said, we need to be thinking, what are these systems going to be doing in 1 year or 3 years or 5 years from now? And that's not easy because they keep improving faster than we expect them to improve. And the number of times over the last couple of years I've seen the latest AI system trending on Twitter and I've gone, oh, yeah, I didn't think that would happen for another 10 years. And I keep revising my timelines down and I still keep being wrong. At the moment, I think the best you can do in terms of writing an assessment task that in some ways trips up these generative AI systems is refer to some information that's not available to the AI. So if you can talk about, you know, a class activity that we did earlier in the semester, or if you can ask a student to relate this to their own personal experience, the generative AI by itself, if the student just puts the question in, is not going to be able to answer that sort of thing. So at the very least, they're going to need to understand what they're doing well enough to provide the appropriate data in their prompt so that it can actually answer the question. Which I guess kind of leads into this next idea, which is to say, well, if the aim of education is to prepare our students to be part of future society and the future workforce, in the workplace, I think it's pretty much inevitable now, generative AI systems are going to be part of our workforce. I saw an survey the other day claiming something like 80% of people in offices are already using these tools. So look, maybe there's a case to say generative AI skills will be an important part of digital literacy going onwards. We should be teaching students how to use these skills.
Peter,
so
just
maybe,
letting you know that we've only got a minute or two left, so just wanted to flag that.
Okay, I'll wrap up quick.
Thank you.
Look, maybe we should be saying to students, yep, you can use these tools and we'll teach you how to use them. But as part of your submission, you reflect on how you did this, what prompts you used, how they worked. And if the system does anything wrong, you're assuming responsibility for it. So if it makes up references and you submit it without checking them, that's on you. Going a step further, I mean, what we are going to see is that we're going to get this flood of misinformation coming in because it's so easy and cheap to produce it. So the ability to actually read and assess a piece of media and know, is this genuine or is this fake information, is going to be absolutely critical. A really nice paper I read on this recently by a few authors, including Philip Dawson, who's at Deakin University in Geelong, making this case that, you know, developing this sort of evaluative judgment is going to be increasingly one of the things that we need to be teaching. Okay, and that's a good point for me to stop.
Thank you. I feel like just listening to that and being absolutely infatuated with what you were saying, and I could tell by the faces of others they were just so engrossed in what you were going with. We could have gone on for another hour, but perhaps it leaves us with the idea that we might have a part two further down the track. So we thank you for that. And as I said, if anyone's got any quick questions, throw them in the chat area. But on that note, we'll let Peter take a bit of a break. And I want to introduce our sponsor for the afternoon. And it's fantastic that we've got Joanne Tate with us, who's a project officer with Ecolinc. The bit that I sort of was really fascinated by, the virtual classroom, which offers engaging environmental courses for students in grades 3 to year 12. So another area where we're moving into the future with the virtual classroom. So without further ado, Joanne, thanks for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you. I think you're on mute, Joanne.
Well, I can unmute myself. There you go. Okay, sorry about that. Can you all
Good.
see the PowerPoint?
Yep, thank you.
Cool. All right. Yeah, hi everybody. I've got some good things to share with you, I hope, and everyone will be getting a copy of this PowerPoint I believe, at the end of the session. So across your network, so that you don't need to write any notes. So the first thing I'd like to talk to you about at Ecolinc, and one of the reasons I wanted to come here was that we have the same old schools that keep coming back to Ecolinc and taking advantage of us. And I felt like there's probably still, because I know from moving around to different things, that there are still some people who don't actually even know about Ecolinc or what it's got to offer for schools. So I thought it was important to do a session for all you guys. And the first one, strangely enough, that I'd like to talk about is some free professional development on artificial intelligence that we are doing in collaboration with the Ballarat Tech School and the Education Department Academy in Ballarat. There's still plenty of spaces open. We've got a good enrolment already, but we have got places left. So there's a day that's being run for secondaries and a day that's being run for primaries. You can see the dates there on the slide. We had Leon, who is our main presenter on both days, come and do a PD at Ecolinc with our staff, and we were quite impressed with him, and we've worked with him to prepare these 2 days. And the focus is very much, because I wanted to make it really teacher friendly, on how a teacher can use the stuff the next day, how they can, you know, think about things like preparing assignments for mixed ability classrooms, getting their kids to feed, for example, a piece of writing into AI and getting suggestions for improvement, all those kind of day-to-day things that as teachers that we do. And to that end, I've been playing with it myself as well, and, you know, getting it to make up assignments that are linked to the Victorian curriculum and that provide, say, 3 levels of achievement depending on my students' capabilities. So it's very good in that way. So anyway, that's basically what this is going to be about. It's very much, that's why I called it Opportunities for Educators. If you would like to come, the day is free, you get lunch and everything provided, and you can see the details there for that particular one. Now, what do we got here? Right, this one is another one that we've got coming up. This one is particularly for secondary teachers, but it's the environmental science, the new study design. Once again, this has been a popular one. I think there's 19 registrations so far, but I'm hoping that we might scoop up a few more schools that are in your network that might be interested in coming. We've got, you know, really good speakers. It's free again. There's lunch provided, and this one is going to be at Ecolinc down at Bacchus Marsh. So once again, if you would like to get tickets to that one, you can see a link in the PowerPoint. Now, what else does Ecolinc have to offer your schools? We do a range of different deliveries. The on-site programs, of which there are 42, are all detailed on the Ecolinc website. Now, a few clues for you here, because we really book out the year ahead, and you can see here when the bookings open, and they're usually booked out within 2 weeks. So it's a really good idea for principals to note in your diary when the bookings are going to open, and then jump in and grab the ones that you want early. And of course, rural or moderately disadvantaged metropolitan schools will get free buses. And the other thing you might like to consider, I know I've worked with clusters of schools before in the Southwest Victorian region, clustering with other schools and filling up a bus and then coming as a group down to Ecolinc. So that would be, in that case, you get a free travel down for the day and back. Outreach, we do have a staff member who goes to primary schools within 1.5 hours travel time of Bacchus Marsh. Once again, it's best to request at the start of term 4 for the next year, but it can be during the year if we have spaces left. So if you do come up with something you'd like to do from our range of outreach programs, please just contact us. And, you know, sometimes there are cancellations and things, and we can fit you in if you haven't managed to book those the year before. We run 3 outreach road trips per year, and these are often down towards Warrnambool, Horsham, Bendigo and Mildura, and they alternate each year. There are other Victorian localities that we would go to, and if your school happens to be in one of those localities, please submit a proposal for a cluster of at least 6 schools by the end of this year, and then you would be a chance to attract our team coming to you, and they usually go there for the week. So they usually travel on a Monday. They're within the cluster of schools Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then they travel back on the Friday, depending on how far away the locality is. Right, video conferencing program. So I coordinate the video conferencing programs. Now, we're getting about 25,000 kids through a year now, so it's become very, very popular. There's a range of different types of programs. This aspect of Ecolinc is called STEMlink. The VCES style-in program, so Victorian Challenge and Enrichment Series, we've been involved in that. This is our 3rd year. So primarily these are for, your gifted and talented type kids. However, we do have enough room to let, whole classes in at times as well. So don't be backward in coming forward. You can see the ones that remain for the rest of the year. What we do is we run these by video conference, and they run for around 2 hours with a break in the middle. We have an expert that dials in for the first hour, and so you can see the first 2 are on dinosaurs, and we have a paleontologist from the University of Queensland who's absolutely fantastic. He does the first hour, and then we go into the hands-on workshop. And Ecolinc will send any schools registered in this a box of goodies that is then used in that second part of the program once the expert has done his thing. These are very popular, and please, if you've got some kids that you think would benefit from them, book them in now. You can see in November, we're doing one in collaboration with ACME. This is the 3rd year we've run this. This has been very popular as well. So in this one, there's the free bus. If you're bringing like a group of people, there'll be a free bus. But this one day is at ACME down in Melbourne in Federation Square, and the second day is at Ecolinc, or vice versa. We sort of swap them between the two. So it's a 2-day program, this one, and it's all about plastics and the science of plastics,
making biodegradable plastic, and also about the impact on our oceans. So that's done at ACME. The kids make a movie, the kids watch a movie, the Plastic Ocean movie, which is a little bit scary, but nevertheless. And then the last one that we're doing this year, it's a new one that I'm putting together, and I've been working with Liberty Science in New York on this one. It's called Challenging Climate Change. So that will be running on November the 20th, and that's open for bookings too. All of these live links would take you to where you can book. Everything's free for these, and as I say, they run for around 2 hours with a 15-minute break for the kids in the middle.
Do you need to wrap up in a sec, Joanne? So if you've got any final comments, that'd be great.
Oh my gosh. Well, they probably have to keep going through the PowerPoint, I guess. Yeah. So I suppose I'd just say the STEMlink programs, we also have women in STEM programs, which you can come to twice a year. And we have an online learning management system that has courses on it that you can just dial into for free. The way you can use those, speaking as a teacher, is you can have the kids do those learning management system courses individually, or you could actually project it up onto a board and use it as your lesson content. So yeah, I'm sorry, I know you need to finish. Oh, I better finish. But I hope to see you all soon, and yeah, excited to involve some new schools.
Thanks, Joanne. And look, you have got a fantastic website, so I encourage people to take some time to have a look at that, because all the information is there, and there's a lot of great information about the work that Ecolinc does. So thank you for that, and sorry for rushing you at the end there, but we're tight for time. I want to thank Peter as well for his fantastic presentation today too. If there's any questions there, Peter has kindly offered for people to email him, and he will follow that up. So feel free to get in touch, and we can pass on those details. But without further ado, and to wrap up, Brendan, over to you.
Thanks very much, Morris. Yes, can I also thank Peter and Joe for today's presentations. We've run out of time. The survey is in the chat box, so please make sure you complete the survey before signing off. Next week's program has a focus on retention of staff, and obviously that's an important issue for rural schools. So if you're not enrolled in that session, please do so. And just a reminder, tomorrow is the Small Schools Forum. Please make sure that you, if you link into that session tomorrow, it's important in terms of future, I think, of rural schools and some of the issues that are facing them. Okay, we've run out of time. In fact, we've gone over time today. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye.